I hadn't planned on spending my afternoon hunting for a computer repair shop, but there I was, driving across town with my CPU on the passenger seat and a rising knot of frustration in my stomach. Work had been piling up all week, and just when I needed my system the most, it decided to crash and refuse to boot. Everything I needed for the next few days depended on getting it fixed fast, and in this small American town, there was only one place that handled repairs: Mateo's Computer Service. It was a tiny shop squeezed between a laundromat and an old bakery, the kind of place people only found when they desperately needed it. A faded open sign flickered in the window like it was struggling to stay alive. The moment I pushed the door open, a little bell chimed overhead, and the smell of dust, wires, and old circuits drifted out to greet me. Inside, the shop was cramped, dim, and full of shelves lined with parts. Hard drives, cables, monitors stacked in uneven piles. It felt like stepping into a time capsule from the early 2000s. Behind the counter stood a man in his late 50s, short, stocky, with silver hair and kind eyes that looked tired from years of working with stubborn machinery. He wore a navy blue apron with the shop's name embroidered on the front. "You need help, son?" he asked, adjusting his glasses. "Yeah," I said, lifting the CPU a little higher. "My computer won't turn on. It died last night, completely unresponsive. I really need it for work." He nodded sympathetically. "You're lucky you came today. We've been pretty packed this week." He tapped the bell sitting next to him. "Daniel, need you for a repair." I hadn't expected anyone else to be working here, but a moment later, someone emerged from the narrow hallway behind the counter. A young man, maybe around my age, maybe a little younger. He looked nothing like the shop's dusty atmosphere. His black hair was messy in a deliberate way, falling slightly over his eyes. He wore a fitted dark t-shirt smudged with the faint traces of machine grease, and jeans that looked like they had been through the wars. The contrast between his rebellious appearance and the quiet shop almost didn't make sense. His eyes landed on mine for a split second, then flicked to the CPU I was carrying. Something sharp, curious, maybe even mischievous sparked there. "Take him to the repair cabin," Mr. Mateo said. "See what you can do." Daniel nodded silently and jerked his head toward the hallway. "Come with me," he said, his voice low and uninterested, but there was something under the surface, an attitude I couldn't quite place. I followed him down the narrow hallway past shelves overflowing with wires. The repair cabin was even smaller than I expected. Barely enough room for one person to stand comfortably, let alone two. A long table stretched across the back wall, covered in screwdrivers, motherboards, open laptops, and cables tangled like vines. "Put it up here," Daniel said, tapping the table with 2 fingers. I stepped forward and lifted the CPU onto the table, and as I leaned over slightly, I felt his eyes on me. A strange, momentary prickle ran up my spine. When I turned, his gaze snapped away, pretending to focus on some tools, but I caught that half-second of attention. And for some reason, my heart beat a little faster. He didn't look shy about it either. "So what's the issue?" he asked, picking up a screwdriver, leaning casually against the table like he had all the time in the world. "It just shut off last night," I said. "No warning. Won't power on anymore." He hummed thoughtfully, turning the CPU slightly. His fingers brushed mine for a second. Accidental or intentional, I couldn't tell. The space was too small, too close. I stepped back slightly, needing a bit of breathing room. He glanced up at me through his hair. "You look stressed about it." "I kinda need it for work," I replied. "Yeah." A faint smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Then you want it done fast." "Well, yeah, obviously." He leaned back, folding his arms, surveying me. Not the computer, me, with a look that felt a little too direct. "People want things fast all the time," he said slowly. "But fast takes effort. Motivation." His tone had shifted. It wasn't professional. It was something else, strangely playful and stubborn at the same time. "What's that supposed to mean?" I asked, narrowing my eyes slightly. He shrugged, walking around the desk, standing a little too close. "Just saying, the more motivated I am, the faster it goes." I felt my jaw tighten. I just need my computer fixed, I said firmly. I'm not here to. To what? He asked softly. The air between us grew heavier, warmer. Not dangerous, just charged. Like he wanted a reaction from me. Like he was testing how far he could push with me before I pushed back. I don't play games, I said, looking him in the eyes. For the first time, he looked genuinely curious. Maybe even impressed. He tilted his head. Most people don't talk back to me in here. I'm not most people. He let out a small laugh, quiet, amused. No, he said. You're not. He turned back to the table, fingers moving over the computer with newfound energy. But he didn't start working. He just placed both hands on the table and said, Look, if you want this done today, convince me. Convince you? I echoed. You're kidding. His shoulders lifted in a half shrug. Not really. There's literally no other repair shop in this town, I said, crossing my arms. You know I don't have a choice. He faced me again, expression softer than before. Not mocking now, just honest in a strange, vulnerable way. That's not why I'm saying it. The small cabin felt even smaller. His voice lowered, almost a whisper. It's boring in here. People come and go. Nobody talks. And you, I don't know. You're interesting. I didn't know what to say to that. Part of me wanted to call him out on his attitude. Another part felt something stir. Unexpected, confusing, but not unpleasant. You want me to talk? I asked slowly. He nodded once. Yeah, talk, stay, actually be here. Not like everyone else who just dumps their stuff and runs. Something in his tone struck me. Not flirtation this time, but thinly covered loneliness. And for reasons I couldn't fully understand in that moment, I stayed. I leaned back against the wall, arms still crossed. Fine, I said. I'll stay. He looked at me with a small, unexpected smile, real, not smug. I'll start working then, he said quietly. And that was when the spark of tension between us shifted. No longer sharp or uncomfortable, but warm, strangely magnetic. Something had opened between us. Something neither of us had expected when I walked through the door. Something that was only just beginning. Daniel finally pulled a chair closer, sat down, and opened the side panel of my CPU with a smooth twist of his wrist. For a few minutes, all I heard was the soft sound of screws dropping onto the desk and the quiet hum of the shop's air conditioner that barely seemed strong enough to cool the small cabin. I stood there awkwardly, hands in my pockets, unsure if I was supposed to talk first or wait for him to say something. He was different now. His earlier cockiness had faded, replaced by a quiet seriousness that made me curious. His eyes narrowed in concentration as he examined the motherboard, his fingers tracing cables with practiced precision. You know, he said suddenly without looking up, most people get nervous when I talk the way I did earlier. I wasn't nervous, I said, though maybe I had been. Just not in the way he assumed. He smirked softly. You weren't. That's why I kept watching you. Watching me, I repeated. He shrugged lightly. You didn't back down. You didn't get flustered. That's different. I leaned against the wall again, feeling the warmth of the tiny room settle around us. You shouldn't mess with customers like that, I said. I know, he replied, his voice unexpectedly honest. It's stupid. I don't even know why I do it. He leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair with a sigh. For the first time he looked tired. Not physically, but emotionally worn out. This job isn't really what I want, he said quietly. But it's what my dad wants me to do. What do you want instead? I asked. He tapped the screwdriver against his knee, thinking. Something else. Anything else. Something where I don't feel trapped in the same room every day. The honesty caught me off guard. A few minutes ago, he'd been teasing me, pushing boundaries. Now he sounded like someone who'd been holding feelings in for too long. I moved a little closer, just enough so we weren't standing on opposite ends of the room. So you act out? I said gently. Because you're frustrated? Maybe, he said. Maybe I'm just bad at talking to people. You're not bad at talking, I said before I could stop myself. Daniel's eyes flicked up to mine, and the look he gave me wasn't smug or playful, just sincere. "You think so? I think—" I paused. "I think you're better at talking when you're honest." Something softened in his expression. Slowly, he scooted his chair over, making just enough space for me to stand beside him. "Here," he said. "Hold this." He handed me a flashlight and angled the CPU so I could shine it into the corner he was inspecting. As I leaned closer, our shoulders brushed, lightly, briefly, but the contact lingered in my mind longer than it should have. The cramped space made every movement feel amplified. Every time he shifted, I felt his presence beside me. Every time I breathed, it felt like the air between us warmed. "You're good at this," I said, watching his hands move carefully along the wiring. "I've done it long enough," he replied. "Doesn't mean I love it, but it keeps me close to my dad." The way he said it told me everything. He didn't hate his father. He just felt overshadowed or maybe unseen. "You too close?" I asked. "Sometimes," he said. "Depends on the day. He's got a lot on his plate, and I guess so do I." He didn't need to explain. I understood the ache in his voice, wanting to be seen, wanting life to feel bigger than the walls closing around you. We worked in silence for a moment. Then Daniel accidentally dropped a small screw, and it rolled off the table and landed near my foot. When we both bent to pick it up, our fingers brushed. Just a soft touch, but the kind that made my breath catch for half a second. He noticed. "Honestly," he said with a light smile, "me neither." He tilted his head toward me. "But I'm glad it did." The words hit deeper than they should have. I found myself smiling too, without even realizing it. The room felt small, but in a good way, like we were in a world separate from the noise outside. A world where talking was easy, where silence wasn't uncomfortable, where two strangers could feel strangely connected after barely an hour. Daniel wiped his hands on a cloth and exhaled. "You know, I'm sorry about earlier." "About what?" "All that attitude. I didn't mean to push you like that. I guess I was just trying to get your attention in the only stupid way I know." His honesty made my chest warm. "You didn't scare me," I said. "Just surprised me." "I surprise myself sometimes," he said quietly. I don't know what changed in that exact moment, but something did. He looked up at me from his chair, and for the first time, there was no wall, no mask, no half-smile hiding something else. Just Daniel. Just a guy trying to figure life out, trying to feel connected to someone in a shop that felt like a cage. "You're easy to talk to," he said. "So are you," I replied. His eyes softened further, and for a heartbeat, the world outside the cabin didn't exist. He picked up his screwdriver again with a tiny smile. "Stay close," he murmured. "I work better when you're here." And so I stayed. Not because I had to, but because something about Daniel, his vulnerability, his honesty, the way he let me in without meaning to, made me want to stay. Made me want to see where this strange connection was leading. The shift in the room's energy happened so quietly that I didn't realize it until we were already in the middle of it. One moment Daniel and I were talking, his hands buried inside the open computer tower while I held a small flashlight for him, and the next, everything felt strangely close. The repair cabin wasn't big to begin with, but that wasn't the reason my chest tightened. It was the way he'd started looking at me, different from before. Not teasing, not testing me, not trying to push a boundary. There was something gentler in his eyes now, something surprisingly attentive, almost careful. "I think I've figured out the issue," he said, leaning back a little. His shoulder brushed mine, and even though it was barely a touch, I felt the warmth of it travel all the way down my arm. "It's not your fault, by the way. Anyone would have missed this." I smiled faintly. "So my computer didn't break because I'm terrible at taking care of it?" He shrugged lightly. "Maybe only a little," he teased, and then laughed under his breath when I nudged him with my elbow. "Nah, it was already hanging on by a thread. This piece," he tapped a loose connector gently, "was going to fail eventually." It struck me again how different he was from the hard-edged boy he had first seemed to be. Earlier, he'd been stubborn, confident, almost too bold for his own good. But now his tone had softened, his posture more relaxed. He wasn't performing. He wasn't trying to win. He was just present. Daniel sat on the small stool while I leaned against the table beside him. For a moment, neither of us spoke. There was only the sound of the little desk fan behind us, humming quietly as it pushed warm air around the room. "Hey," he said suddenly quietly. "You all right?" I blinked. "Yeah, why? You look like you're somewhere else." I hadn't realized I'd been staring at his hands. Long fingers, small scars, little flecks of dust from working with equipment all day. Somehow that felt too personal to admit. "Just thinking," I said, clearing my throat. "MMH." He nodded, but there was a small smile pulling at the corner of his mouth, as if he knew more than he let on. "Thinking's dangerous. Then you must be in trouble all the time." His laugh was softer this time, less guarded. He rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly, and something about that moment, that tiny human hesitation, shifted us into an even gentler space. "Can you hold this for a sec?" he asked, handing me a screwdriver before leaning deeper into the open CPU. His shoulder pressed fully against my side now. I didn't dare move. I held my breath without meaning to. I didn't know if he felt it too, that subtle quickening inside me, until he paused mid-movement, eyes lifting slightly toward mine. Not fully, not openly. Just enough to say he'd noticed. And he didn't move away. The closeness stretched between us, filling every small inch of the room, every tiny gap in the air. The tension wasn't heavy or awkward. It was warm. A strange new warmth that neither of us wanted to pull back from. He cleared his throat suddenly, accidentally knocking a small screw off the edge of the table. It bounced twice before rolling toward the floor. Reflexively, we both reached for it. We both missed, and we both ended up bumping into each other. My hand brushing his shoulder knocking into mine, the two of us stumbling just enough to laugh breathlessly. The screw continued rolling until it disappeared beneath a low cabinet. Daniel groaned. "Great. That was the only one I didn't want to lose." "I'll get it," I said. We knelt at the same time. The space under the cabinet was tiny, and both of us had to lean close to peer inside. Our arms pressed together, our knees touching the dusty floor at the same angle. I could feel his breath near my cheek. "You see it?" he whispered, as if speaking normally would break something. "Yeah," I murmured back, but neither of us reached for it yet. We just stayed there, shoulder against shoulder, breath mingling in the small, shadowed space. Then Daniel shifted, just slightly, but enough that his cheek brushed mine. The touch was feather-soft, almost accidental, and for a heartbeat he froze. I froze. Everything inside me pulled tight. His voice came out low, almost uncertain. "Sorry, did I?" "It's fine," I said quickly, but quietly, afraid to speak too loudly. Maybe the thin air in the cabin messed with my head. Maybe the quiet did. Maybe it was just him. But in that moment, nothing felt wrong or confusing. It felt like standing on the edge of something new. Something fragile, something beautiful if we handled it right. He inhaled shakily, as if trying to decide whether to lean away or closer. I beat him to it without meaning to by reaching under the cabinet again. As I stretched forward, my hand brushed his again. And this time he didn't pull away. Neither did I. "Got it?" I whispered, my fingers closing around the tiny screw. But when I turned back to him, he wasn't looking at the screw. He was looking at me. Really looking. "What?" I asked, voice softer than I expected. He swallowed. "Nothing. He exhaled slowly, eyes flicking from mine to the space between us. "You're not what I thought when you walked in. What did you think I was?" He smiled a little embarrassed. "Honestly, someone who'd pretend not to care. Someone who'd be annoyed. Someone who'd be in a hurry to get out of here. And now," he hesitated, "now you feel different." The words landed somewhere deep inside me, warm and unervingly sincere. For a moment we didn't speak. I wasn't sure who leaned closer first. Maybe neither of us did. Maybe it was just the air between us shrinking on its own. Then, a loud metallic clank sounded from the front of the shop. We both jerked upright in surprise, bumping our heads lightly against the table edge as we shot to our feet. Daniel cursed under his breath, rubbing the back of his head. From the front room, Mr. Mateo called out, "Everything all right back there?" Daniel glanced at me, wide-eyed, a tiny smile almost breaking through despite the jolt. "We're good," he shouted back, voice cracking just slightly from the sudden tension. But when the cabin fell quiet again, we both knew something had changed. The accidental brush of skin, the closeness under the cabinet, the way he'd looked at me, like he was seeing something new, something he wasn't ready to explain yet. Daniel cleared his throat, trying to regain his usual composure. "So, we should finish this before my dad decides to come in." "Yeah," I said, but my voice sounded different too. Lighter, warmer. We stood side by side again at the table, this time not by accident. And when our arms brushed again, neither of us moved away. The moment under the cabinet wasn't a confession. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't even fully intentional. But it was enough to shift the ground between us. Enough to tell both of us, silently, that something had just opened, something neither of us could ignore now. It was the kind of moment that didn't need words. The kind of moment that changes everything by simply existing. Daniel had just finished tightening the last screw when the unmistakable sound of heavy footsteps echoed from the front of the shop. They weren't quick or impatient, but steady, the kind of step that belonged to someone used to being in charge. Mr. Mateo's voice followed, deep and lightly strained with suspicion as he called out again. "Daniel? Why is it taking this long?" "Huh." Daniel stiffened beside me. Not dramatically, just a small tightening of his shoulders, a quick glance at the door. But it was enough to tell me he wasn't ready for his dad to walk in at that exact moment. Not when the air between us still felt delicate, still carrying the thin thread of something new and unspoken. "He's coming?" Daniel murmured, lowering his voice without thinking. His tone wasn't nervous exactly, but it held something close to it, caution maybe, or awareness. He wiped his hands quickly on a cloth, brushing away the dust that had settled on his palms. I watched as he moved around the table, suddenly tidying things he'd ignored for the last 40 minutes. "You all right?" I whispered. He nodded once but didn't look at me. "Yeah, just give him something normal to see when he walks in." Normal. Like we hadn't been inches from each other under a cabinet barely minutes ago. Like his cheek hadn't brushed mine. Like we both hadn't felt that shift. Quiet, delicate, and impossibly hard to pretend away. Before I could say anything, the curtain separating the repair cabin from the front of the shop rustled sharply. Then Mr. Mateo pushed it aside and stepped in. He took in the scene quickly. The open CPU on the table, the scattered tools, Daniel standing a little too straight, and me with my hands awkwardly clasped in front of me. His eyebrows lifted. "You two are still on this?" he asked, not harshly, but with a pointed weight in his tone. Daniel spoke first, quick and steady. "The connector was faulty. I replaced it and checked the board twice." His dad eyed him. "Twice? Since when do you double-check?" Daniel tensed a little, but he didn't look away. "Since it's someone else's data on the line." I felt a strange pang of something warm at that, something like pride, maybe, for how seriously he suddenly took this, for how he spoke up without flinching. Mr. Mateo grunted, folding his arms. Then his attention shifted to me. "You been waiting all this time?" he asked. Yeah," I said. "But it's fine. Really. You look like you've been here ages." I forced a small smile. Computers don't break on easy days. Daniel glanced sideways at me, the corner of his mouth almost tugging upward. It was the smallest thing, but it steadied me. Mr. Mateo nodded once, then stepped closer, inspecting the open machine. His eyes moved slowly over the motherboard, the screws, the connected cables. Daniel stood still beside him, hands behind his back like he was being inspected too. For a moment, the room was painfully silent. Then his dad cleared his throat. "Looks all right." Daniel exhaled quietly, the kind of breath you release only when pressure lifts. But the silence wasn't done. As if sensing something, Mr. Mateo suddenly turned to Daniel and gave him a long, searching look. Not angry, Not suspicious of anything specific, but perceptive, the way parents pick up on subtle changes. "You look different today," he said. "Everything okay?" Daniel froze. Just a millisecond, a tiny pause, but enough that I felt it. He forced a shrug. "Yeah, just tired." His dad didn't seem entirely convinced, but he let it go. "Fine. Clean up and put everything back. Customers been waiting long enough." As he turned to leave the cabin, he paused by my side, lowering his voice. "I'll get your bill ready. Shouldn't take much longer." "Thanks," I said. He nodded once and stepped out, letting the curtain fall shut behind him. The instant he was gone, Daniel let out a slow breath and slumped against the table. His shoulders dropped. His posture softened. For the first time since his dad walked in, he looked at me properly. "You okay?" I asked quietly. He huffed a weak laugh. "Shouldn't I be asking you that?" "Maybe both." We shared a small smile. Faint, but real. And something inside me eased. He pushed a hand through his hair, shaking off whatever tension had clung to him. "He didn't see anything," I said softly. "I know," Daniel replied, his voice gentler now. "But it wouldn't take much to make him ask more questions." He rubbed his thumb along the edge of the table, staring at the floor like he was sorting thoughts he didn't dare say aloud. I could see the conflict in his eyes, not fear exactly, but uncertainty, caution, the awareness that something had shifted between us and he had no idea how to navigate it under his father's roof. Finally, he looked up. "You're not going to say anything, right?" he asked. A quiet question, a vulnerable one. I stepped closer, not touching him, not crowding him, just enough to show I wasn't pulling away. "Of course not," I said. "Whatever happened here stays between us." Something softened in his expression. Relief mixed with something as fragile as hope. "Good," he whispered, "because I don't know how to explain all this." He gestured vaguely between us, the space that only moments ago had held warmth, tension, and a closeness we weren't ready to name. "I don't either," I admitted. We stood there, caught in a silence that felt less like awkwardness and more like understanding. A shared secret forming quietly between us, held carefully in both our hands. Daniel reached out, slow and hesitant, and lightly brushed the back of his fingers against mine. It wasn't a grab, not even a full touch, just a fleeting, careful confirmation that he trusted me to hold this moment the way he was holding it. Warm, quiet, protected. Then he stepped back, clearing his throat. "Come on," he said softly. "Let's get this finished before he comes back." But even as he moved toward the tools, that tiny brush of his hand remained between us. A quiet secret, fragile but deeply real, one we both carried out of the silence. Daniel worked with a quieter focus after his dad left the cabin. The atmosphere had settled into something warm but delicate, like a table where two candles still burned after the guests had left. Flame steady, but close enough to touch if the air shifted even slightly. He tightened the final screws with slow, almost deliberate care. I stood beside him, handing him the tools he needed without him having to ask. Neither of us commented on how natural it suddenly felt to work together, how unforced the closeness had become. When the last piece clicked into place, Daniel exhaled in a way that sounded like both relief and regret. Relief that the work was done, regret that our time in this little cabin was almost over. He plugged the PC tower into the small test monitor and pressed the power button. The machine whirred to life, lights blinking, screen glowing a soft blue. "It's fixed," he murmured, stepping back to let me see. The computer booted perfectly, smoother than it had even when I'd first bought it. I smiled, genuinely grateful, genuinely impressed. "You did a great job," I said. He lifted one shoulder, pretending not to care. "I always do." But the faint flush along his cheekbones said the compliment meant more than he let on. He unplugged everything and helped me move the computer back into its case. The moment our hands brushed along the side panel, we both froze for a tiny heartbeat. Subtle, barely noticeable, but enough to send a quiet warmth through my chest. Daniel cleared his throat. "I'll, take this out front for you." He lifted the tower easily and pushed past the curtain, leaving me alone in the repair cabin. I stood there, letting the silence wrap around me. So much had happened in this tiny room. Tension, mistakes, honesty, near confessions. It felt strange stepping out of it now. When I finally moved into the main shop, Daniel was at the counter, his dad tapping numbers into an old computer to generate the bill. "You're all set," Mr. Mateo said, sliding the printed receipt across the desk. Daniel fixed it quicker than I expected. Daniel coughed lightly, eyes lifting to mine for a moment. "Yeah, well, I kinda had help." I frowned gently. "I didn't really do anything." "You were here," he replied softly. His dad didn't catch the tone, didn't notice the quiet meaning tucked inside those words. But I did, and it made my chest tighten, warm and full. Mr. Mateo handed me the bill. "Cash or card?" "Card." I paid quickly, trying to act normal as Daniel stood beside me. Unusually still, unusually quiet. His dad didn't sense anything was different. He simply walked toward the storage shelves to put away a spare connector. The shop fell into a brief, tentative silence. Daniel's eyes followed his dad until he was out of earshot, then shifted back to me with a quiet urgency. "You free for a minute?" he whispered. I nodded. He gestured toward the door. "Come with me." We stepped outside together. The evening air felt cool against my skin after the warmth of the repair cabin. The sun hung low, dipping behind the buildings across the street, casting long orange streaks across the pavement. The shop sat in a quiet strip on the edge of town, the kind of place where traffic slowed in the evenings, where people shopped on foot, where the hum of life softened as the day faded. Daniel led me around the side of the building, where the back alley opened into a small, half-paved yard. It wasn't pretty, cracked concrete, a faint petrol smell from the generator, a stack of old cardboard boxes, but away from the shop, it felt private. He leaned against the wall, crossing his arms, looking at the ground for a moment before he spoke. "You're leaving now, right?" "Yeah, I should." He nodded, still not looking up. "Okay." But that wasn't what he meant. I heard it in the way his voice tightened, in the way he rubbed his thumb along his wrist nervously. "You wanted to say something." He lifted his head then, and I could see it, the conflict, the hesitation, the quiet battle inside him. A part of him wanted to speak, the other part was terrified to. "I've been trying to figure out how to say this without sounding stupid," he said finally. "I don't think you're capable of sounding stupid." He huffed a soft laugh, shy, almost. "Trust me, I am." He pushed a hand through his hair, breathing in slowly. The fading sunlight painted the edges of his face gold. "When you first came in today," he began, "I didn't think it'd be any different from the other customers. I thought I'd just fix your computer, joke around a bit, get through the day." I stayed quiet, letting him go at his own pace. But then, something shifted, and it freaked me out. "What shifted?" I asked quietly. He looked me straight in the eyes. "You." The word landed like a warm weight in my chest. "And me," he added, voice softer. "Something about you. I don't know. It caught me off guard." He laughed awkwardly, shaking his head. "I know it sounds dramatic. It's not like we've known each other for long. But there was a moment back there, under the table, when we were looking for that stupid screw. Something changed for me. It wasn't a declaration. It wasn't polished. It wasn't confident. It was real. And it hit me with a gentle, overwhelming warmth. "I felt it too," I said. He exhaled shakily, like he'd been holding that breath the entire time. "Good," he whispered, "because I thought I was imagining it. You weren't." He looked at me again, really looked. His eyes held that same softness from earlier, that tentative openness he kept trying to hide. He pushed off the wall and took one small step closer, then another, until he was standing directly in front of me, close enough that I could feel the nervous energy radiating off him. His voice dropped. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything." He hesitated. "If I'm wrong, tell me. If I'm reading things wrong, tell me. But I've been trying to stop thinking about it and I can't." I swallowed. "Thinking about what?" His gaze flicked briefly to my lips, then back to my eyes, quickly, nervously, as if ashamed of being caught. That moment, he whispered. The one where you didn't pull away. I didn't want to. His breath caught. Right? He murmured. Okay, good. He stepped even closer. Slow, cautious, letting me move away if I wanted. I didn't. You don't have to say anything else, he said softly. I just didn't want the day to end without being honest. Honest about what? That I like you, he whispered. More than I expected to. More than makes sense after just a few hours. My chest tightened in the warmest way. I placed a hand gently on his forearm. Nothing bold, nothing reckless, just a quiet, steady touch. I like you too, I said. For a second, Daniel didn't move. He just stared at me, eyes soft, lips parted slightly as if trying to process the words out loud. Then he let out the faintest breath, a breath that sounded like relief, like disbelief, like the start of something new. Okay, he whispered. Okay, good. Silence settled around us. But it wasn't heavy. It wasn't awkward. It felt full, charged with a new kind of warmth we were both learning to understand. Can I tell you something else? He asked. I nodded. I don't know where this goes. I don't know what happens next. But I want to find out. With you. My throat tightened. Me too, I whispered.